Hello and welcome everyone to this second workshop, Training for Competition in British Parliamentary Debate. My name is Sterling Higa and I'll be hosting it. It's been inspiring and humbling to know that hundreds of people watched the first workshop in the 4 days that it's been up online. We're nearing about 250 views. And so thank you to those of you who have been sharing these videos and these workshops, and hopefully you'll enjoy this one. The basic idea we're going to be talking about today is a shift in the way that you view debate, which will be best encapsulated in this image and the following image. So this, of course, is the final stage at the World Universities Debating Championship, the largest and most prestigious competition in British parliamentary debate in the world. And this is a National Basketball Association game in the United States, where two teams of the best basketball players in the world will be competing against each other, in Miami in this case. Now, the question that we're going to be thinking about today is, what does it mean to think of debate as a sport? How does that affect the way that we train, the way that we prepare for competition? And I believe that this simple metaphor is helpful in illuminating what we should be doing and perhaps what we aren't doing when we think about preparing for competition. Because a lot of British parliamentary competitors perhaps don't come from an athletic background, or they don't perceive the connection between what they're doing in debate and what they were doing in sport. And this limits what I think what techniques we use, what methods we use when we're training. And I think that we impose this limit on ourselves, but if we lift the limit by changing our metaphor, our training will improve as well. So the workshop goal today, in the next 40 odd minutes, is to provide you with a conceptual framework, thinking about debate as a sport, so that you can develop your own training system for debate. Again, I'm not trying to impose my ways of training upon you. I'm just trying to give you a slightly different perspective, a different metaphorical lens through which you can view the world and then make decisions for yourself. The ideal here is, equipped with this metaphor, you won't need to question specific training methods. You'll just look at the training method and say, is this what I would do if I were training as if this was a sport? And if the answer is yes, then you should adopt it. And if the answer is no, maybe you need to reconsider it. Now, this is a preview of all of the things that we'll cover, just so you have an outline of what is to come. The first thing I'm going to be talking about is nutrition and conditioning, and how these play a key role in athletic activities, but how they also play an equally important role in the activities of the mind that we might think debate is. A second thing we're going to talk about, and this is an important concept, is that basketball teams don't always play full court. The way that basketball teams train is not the way that they play. So if the way that we train is the way that we play in British parliamentary debate, we're likely doing something wrong from the point of view of sport. The third thing we're going to look at are different drills for different skills, and I'll be going through 20 of my favorite exercises that you can use to troubleshoot different aspects of your performance as a debater. The fourth thing we're going to talk about is the importance of providing feedback without judgment. So rather than judging every round and having to rank participants, figuring out how to incorporate feedback into your practices where you're not judging people and you're using more positive feedback to encourage their growth rather than just criticizing their faults. The fifth thing we're going to talk about is the need to record and study the tape. Studying the tape both of greats, the legends in the sport, but also studying the tape of yourself and recording your performance so you can figure out where you are weakest and how you need to change your training to improve. And then we're going to talk about how rest and recovery can prevent injury. The basic idea here being that the mind is a physical entity, and you can't run full steam 24/7, 52 weeks out of the year. What you're going to need to do sometimes is to cool off and relax, periodize your workouts, and incorporate social activities and restorative activities so you can perform at your highest for a longer period of time. All right, let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is how nutrition and conditioning are key. And there are two things to talk about here. The first is to stretch a metaphor and say that the information you consume in debate basically constitutes the nutrition in what we're thinking about. So just like an athlete, if they want to perform at the top of their game, is extremely conscious of what they're taking into our bodies. We too, as debaters, have to be very conscious of what we are taking in terms of information. Now, I'm going to go through some of the traditional routes that people take to gather information, and I'll cover some of the details there. But then I want to talk about some alternative frameworks. So the first thing that people will do very often is read periodicals, like The Economist. When people are reading periodicals, they're trying to gather information about current events and what's happening in the world. Now, a periodical like The Economist, which is published weekly, is, I think, a fairly useful place to start if you have no knowledge of current events around the world, because it's sorted by region, it's a single issue, and you're able to get a sort of short nugget of what's happening in a specific country. But of course, there are briefings every week in The Economist as well. So maybe 2 to 3, maybe 4 pages on a single topic. So in this particular issue, there was a section about inflation and will inflation return. Now, if you know nothing about inflation, reading this 4-page Economist article on the prospects of inflation returning is going to be extraordinarily helpful compared to not knowing anything at all. So The Economist, I think, is one of those magazines, and the reason why it's popular among debaters, I think, is because it has it all, and because if you are ordering the print edition, for instance, it's all contained sort of neatly and it's organized well, which makes it a good reference material when you're in a debate round and you need to consult it during prep. Because if your notes are scattered, if you just have 50 printed articles from the New York Times or Al Jazeera or the BBC or any other major news source, you will have difficulty sort of sorting and indexing your materials. The Economist is a sort of simple way because it handles the indexing for you, which makes it a useful publication. But there are other periodicals as well, daily newspapers, weekly newspapers around the world that you might consider. I think that you need to think about the breadth, what is covered, and the depth. Obviously, you're going to be trading off between these two all the time. And the question is, which direction do you want to go in? The second thing that people often consume are documentaries. I think that documentaries are highly useful because they provide images. Now, a lot of times in debate, we exist in this sort of abstract territory where we're just describing the mechanics of arguments. I think that very often we need to describe the impacts of arguments, which I believe always descend to the level of human suffering. Documentaries are an excellent way to understand visual images that you can insert into your speeches. And so I recommend watching documentaries, especially about conflicts or issues that you're not familiar with, just so you have a visual conception. Another thing about documentaries that can be helpful is they provide a mental hat rack in your brain on which you can hang things, because images stick in our mind better than abstract ideas. So if I want to be talking about pollution in China, I could read 100 pages about pollution in China. But what's going to be more useful is probably just to watch a 10-minute Vice documentary about pollution in China, so I can see the rivers, so I can see the air, so I can see maybe some of these chemical factories that are polluting, and I can have an understanding of what that looks like on the ground, which will then allow me to better relate that issue to my judges in rounds. So documentaries can be helpful as well. The third type of resource are podcasts. Now, I think that listening to lectures, podcasts, interviews, conversations is helpful because it helps you to get the colloquial sense of how you would make an argument. When we read something, that's a very different language than is used if you're going to try to express something in speech. So listening to podcasts, listening to highly educated people talk about certain issues can help you develop the language that's necessary to discuss things. This is especially helpful for people who are English as a second language or English as a foreign language, because a lot of times you're trying to get familiar with the colloquial use of English. If you listen to English speakers just sort of talking back and forth, this is a good way to amass this information. Now, I'm not including specific recommendations for documents here because I think you should figure out for yourself what periodicals, what documentaries, what podcasts are most interesting to you and what are most valuable to you. The one thing I will say is I think that debaters don't read enough books. And the reason why I advocate for the reading of books is because books allow you to have a sort of comprehensive overview of a topic. Now, I don't necessarily think it's as valuable to read a comprehensive overview of a specific topic. However, what books can do is provide you with conceptual frameworks that allow you to understand a broad class of debates, which then improves your performance in all of the debates. So I'm going to briefly review 3 books that I think do this in a great way. I'm not recommending that you read these books, but I think they're a good place to start if you're interested. So the first book is Justice by Michael Sandel, who is a Harvard philosophy professor. And Michael Sandel has a study basically comparing various forms of morality, rule-based moralities, consequentialist moralities, and then sort of virtue ethic based moralities. And this book is a great study of thinking through how we make ethical decisions. Now, a lot of debates come down to trade-offs and ethical decisions, which means that this book helps you to understand the frameworks that are being used either subconsciously or consciously by debaters within rounds, and then gives you the language necessary to critique it. So it's a sort of brief study in morality. There's also a free YouTube lecture series on this same topic for those who don't want to get the book form. The second book is The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. Now, this book, I think, in the light of history, is flawed. It has a fairly socially Darwinistic view of the world, which I don't know is completely correct. However, it is a fantastic book in terms of looking at a broad sweep of history and extracting themes. Very often in debate, you're asked to talk about a specific conflict about which you may not be familiar and you may not be knowledgeable, you may lack the specialized knowledge to discuss that topic. But if you are able to place that within a framework of a certain type of conflict, so this is an ethnic conflict, and what are the themes that typically play out in ethnic conflicts, then you will be on solid ground. This is a type of book where even if you disagree with the conclusions of the book, you should be looking at the methodology, the way that Will and Ariel Durant have extracted themes from history and then tried to make sense of history through these themes. Now, whether they did a good or bad job depends on whether or not you agree with the themes. I think that they did a good job in terms of extracting the themes, even if I disagree with the themes they extracted. Now, the third thing is Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall, which is a book about 10 maps that Marshall argues to sell books will help explain the world. The idea here is many of our international relations debates, our foreign policy debates, center around geopolitics. Now, you can read The Economist, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, any of these magazines or periodicals that study foreign policy and international affairs for years without ever gaining the conceptual framework of understanding geopolitics at its core, understanding the way that geography influences the actions of countries and gives them certain interests that are non-negotiable. I think that this book does an excellent job of equipping you with that framework, which then allows you to excel in many debates that come up about international relations. Now, you might think, well, these books are hundreds of pages long. The Lessons of History is only 100 pages long, but Justice and Prisoners of Geography are about 300 pages long. Why should I put in all that effort? Well, the question is, do you want just sort of atomized information, or do you want a conceptual framework which will allow you to make sense of information? If you're a freshman or a sophomore and you're planning to debate for 4 or 5 years, I think that it's highly useful to read these books in the beginning. That way, anytime you're reading the news subsequently, you're able to make light of that information given what has come before. So that's the diet slide. The second thing, and this will go faster, is about the mind and the body, or is the mind actually the body? Now, I'm of the persuasion that the mind is the body, and therefore any intellectual process is a physical process, which means all of the things that boost our physical performance will inevitably boost our mental performance as well. So there are 5 things I want to cover that are very basic. The first is breathing. It's something we do 24 hours out of the day, and we can do it well or we can do it poorly. In general, you want to breathe less and through your nose. Sleeping is important. It tends to impact our performance if we're getting poor sleep. And a lot of debaters will neglect sleep at debate tournaments and wonder why they're not performing well. I think that prioritizing sleep, especially in, say, like the week prior to a competition, is something that athletes would do. It's something that we should be doing as debaters as well. Diet, of course, what you eat affects how you perform. Now, debaters at debate tournaments tend to eat maybe the worst diets imaginable. So at American tournaments, people are just eating pizza and drinking a lot of beer and fried foods. At European tournaments, a lot of fast food, a lot of beer, a lot of fried foods. Just eating slightly healthier would probably make a difference in your performance. Movement is important, especially now that we're in the age of Zoom and Discord debates. Humans, tend to think better when we're in movement. If you think about it, we evolved to think in movement through locomotion. Now, when you are debating, you're very often asked to be fixed for a long period of time. If you can find moments in debate tournaments to stand up and walk around, that can be helpful as well in terms of improving your performance. And the last thing is stress management. So stress impairs our memory, it impairs our creativity, and it hinders our ability to learn. This has been well proven in the research literature. Now, managing your stress, therefore, I think becomes one of the keys to success in competition, especially because when we're in limited preparation debates, we need to think quickly and we need to come up with answers. If we are impaired because we are stressed, we're going to do less well than we would otherwise. Now, here's an easy win, and I want to give you, there will be 3 of these easy wins scattered throughout this, and I want to give you just one exercise that we can do together, and it's square breathing. So the basic idea of square breathing is you're going to inhale, hold, exhale, and hold the air out, and I prefer to do a 4-count square breathing just to start, so we'll do this together. You'll just go in through your nose, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out through your nose, 2, 3, 4, hold the air out, 2, 3, 4. And you could repeat that maybe 3 or 4 times. Just doing that 4 times, which will take you about a minute, will reduce your overall levels of stress, which I personally believe will improve your performance. Now, these are simple, just minimum investment, maximum return activities, but the general framework that is provided, that you should think about your mind as your body, I think will help you to make a lot of sound training decisions when you're thinking about debate. Second thing, basketball teams don't always play full court. This is a basketball court and the teams are playing. It's 5-on-5, it's full court. They're going to be running around for, whatever, 12 minutes a quarter, 48 minutes a game. That's a lot of running. That's a lot of effort. And no basketball team does this every day at practice. No professional basketball team plays full court 5-on-5, 48-minute games every day at practice. That would be literal insanity. It would run their players into the ground. And yet, what we know, instead, what they're doing is they're having different drills for different skills. They're targeting different activities. But when we are debating, we very often run completely afoul of this. So I've attended a few schools. I've seen how different debate practices are conducted, and I've heard from secondhand reports how other debates practices are conducted. A lot of times it's just people get together and they run around with a judge. I think that this is maybe one of the least productive ways to structure your practice. And the reason why is it's exhausting in terms of the overall performance required. And you're not able to focus on any specific aspect of your performance because you're too busy focusing on it all, right? When basketball players are playing a game, they're exhibiting their skills. They're not honing their skills. Basketball players don't play a basketball game to get better at the skills. They're just there to exhibit the skills that they have. So our training should not consist of exhibition round after exhibition round. We should be using our practices more efficiently than that. Now, given that setup, I have to give you something useful. And this is maybe the cornerstone of this lecture. It's probably the thing that you will find the most value in and the thing that you will share with people most often. So different drills for different skills. What I've done here is I've tried to collect 20 of my favorite activities for enhancing your skill as a debater. Each of them focused on a different area of performance, and I'll briefly cover all of them. Let me check the time though. All right, we've got plenty of time. So here are 20 drills. The first is a full debate round without judgment. Now, pulling the judgment away makes this an exercise in awareness and self-reflection, because you have to think to yourself, how did we perform in the round? What is the likely ranking of the round? And all of that's going to be untainted by a judge then criticizing people within the round. This is an extraordinarily helpful activity because it reduces the pressure on people to perform for the judge and allows them to just focus on doing their best. It also allows everyone to succeed, because it is possible to succeed while getting the fourth in the round if you are improving your performance. However, it doesn't feel like improving your performance if the judge at the end of the round says, well, opening government, you were in the 4. Even if you had improved your opening government performance over previous rounds, if a judge says you got the 4, you're going to feel like you lost. So just take out the judgment. That's a simple drill. The second drill is just to do top half drills. Now, I personally believe a lot of debaters will say, well, I need to practice back half more. I think that if you understand the basic principles of top half, you should be able to win from the back half. The top half is the foundation, and especially because teams struggle with opening government, it's something that you should be practicing. It's also possible to practice top half debates when you only have 4 people. And if you are from a small school, you only have a few people, you can do a top half debate with 3 people, right? You could do a top half debate with 2 people if people are willing to iron person their teams. But the basic idea here is you want to practice top half. You can also put 2 top half debates into the time it would have taken to run a full round, right? A full round takes 15 minutes plus 56 minutes of debate plus 15 minutes for adjudication afterwards. That's an hour and a half. If you do 2 top half debates, 15-minute prep, 30-minute debate, 15-minute prep, 30-minute debate, that's an hour and a half. And instead of getting 1 speech in, you've now gotten 2 speeches in, which I think over the long term is going to make your performance better than just running repetitive top half rounds, full rounds. Now, the third drill is a bottom half drill. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do you do a bottom half drill? And the answer is you just pull up a debate round online, you and your partner prep the motion, you watch the top half round, and then you and your other back half team come in on the back half. Now, obviously, it's not helpful to do this with like World's Grand Finals and break rounds, but you can actually find a lot of World's prelim rounds on YouTube now. And you can find mid-level rounds and index these to be slightly better than the rounds that you're used to being in, just so you can experience, okay, how would we come up with arguments on the bottom half when we're in this round? The fourth drills are iron team and iron bench drills. Now, this starts a section of these drills that are focused on exhaustion and pushing yourself beyond your limits. I think that a lot of times we train in a very sort of minimal way. It's not hard. Outside of doing debate, I train a little bit in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one of the basic ideas in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you're going to compete, is there should be practices where you practice so hard that it's like beyond any conception of what is possible. That way, when you show up on the day of competition, it's relatively easier for you than it was than practice was. Of course, you don't want to practice like that all the time because you'll just be exhausted, you'll get injured. But occasionally, you have to turn it up to 120%. An iron team or an iron bench exercise does this. That's where one person does both speeches on a team, so prime minister and deputy prime minister, member of opposition and opposition whip, or, and this is extreme, and you can do a full round with just 2 people, one person does an entire bench. The aspect here that is focused on is just your endurance. Can you be coherent? Can you try your best to fulfill the roles of each speech when you're exhausted and you've just given 3 speeches and now you're asked to whip the round? If the answer is yes, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. Now, you could practice 4 rounds, right? Like, which will take you, I don't know, 8 hours. Or you could practice 1 hour giving 4 speeches, which will give you the same simulation of the exhaustion that you will feel in round 6 of Worlds, right? After, debating 3 rounds in a day, 6 rounds in 2 days. And that will give you the simulation of, can I perform under pressure? Can I get better? you want to do this infrequently. This is not an every practice thing. This is maybe a one practice, and you don't want to do this with any proximity to competition, right? This is maybe like 4 weeks, 6 weeks out from competition. Let's just exhaust ourselves and see how we do. This is another exhaustion exercise called mooting. Mooting is where you just ask somebody a lot of questions. So you get somebody on your team and their job is to give like a prime minister speech, except that they have to take every single question that is offered. So they can't wave people down. The goal here is as soon as they get on track in their speech, you interrupt them and ask them the question. They have to respond, and then they have to reorient themselves to the speech. The goal that they're practicing, just like mindfulness meditation, the goal is to return to focusing on your breath. In this case, the goal is to return to focusing on your speech. Now, typically when we're doing this in a regular practice round, we might only take 1 or 2 questions. So we're not actually practicing the skill of answering the question and returning to our speech because we're not doing it deliberately enough. Mooting, we're just practicing. Can I answer the question? Can I return to the speech? Can I answer the question? Can I return to the speech? Over and over and over again. 6th is a pressure drill. Now, a pressure drill consists of making things very hard for somebody who's giving a speech. Now, whereas mooting, you want them to take all the questions, in pressure drills, they're going to decline all questions. But you're going to be the rudest team that has ever participated in debate. You're going to start saying, hey, I have a question. You're going to start interrupting them. You're going to start yelling. Even one time we ran a pressure drill at the University of Hawaii. The debater who was the pressurer, midway through the round, kicked the chair over and left the round. The speaker, who was unflappable, just continued giving the speech. Now, the reason why you want to do this is occasionally at competitions, you will run into a team that is just harassing you, tremendously rude. You don't want to crack under the pressure of that team because they're assholes. You want to be the team that is unflappable under pressure. And you can simulate this in a safe way in practice. You know that the person's not actually going to hit you or get physically violent. You know that they're just sort of yelling to harass you and to make you better. And that's helpful for the pressure that comes with real teams who are trying to harass you. The 7th drill is flowing. So a flowing drill is just watch a debate round and flow all the speeches as if you were just taking notes. You can flow maybe as if you were going to speech in the round, that's fine. But I think it's helpful to actually disconnect the flowing from the parts of the debate, because the goal of a flowing exercise should be to say, am I able to use shorthand? Am I able to record enough information fast enough when I'm watching these speeches? Am I able to keep track? And then to figure out where are the issues in my flowing. So to go back and review your flow and maybe even rewatch the debate and compare your flow to the debate to see how it tracks with what actually happened. The 8th drill is PE prep, physical education prep. A lot of times at debate tournaments, you actually have to trek quite far from the GA to your round, which means that you don't really get 15 minutes of prep, and your prep is interrupted by sometimes having to jog, sometimes having to walk really fast, and maybe you're out of breath. The question is, are you able to prepare for that? Do you know how to prepare when you're sort of tired, out of breath, and having to walk? A good way to test this is just in practice to do a PE prep. You can just walk with your partner during prep. That's the basic version of it. You could jog with your partner during prep. You could do a bunch of push-ups right before prep, so you're slightly out of breath, and then do your prep. But the basic idea is you should be comfortable doing prep in about 12 minutes because you won't get the full 15, and when you're slightly out of breath and tired. The 9th thing is a field debate. We debate a lot of times in classrooms, but in out rounds, very often you're in large rooms, sometimes without amplification, which means you have to be loud. Now, one way to practice being loud is to just go out in a field and have your debate outside and stand far enough apart from each other that you have to project your voice and you have to be clear in order to be audible. The 10th debate is a street debate. This is maybe not possible because of COVID, but you could just go out on the street and have a debate. This is helpful in terms of reducing your embarrassment or self-consciousness about debating. You want to be able to just go out on the sidewalk and debate and not be worried about what people are thinking, people walking by. This is a sort of, very niche drill, but I think it is helpful for some people in terms of reducing their self-consciousness and their nervousness about debating. The 11th drill is prep only. So I think it's helpful sometimes just to get together if you have a regular partner and prep out 4 or 5 motions. It'll take you an hour and 15 minutes. and it'll have a lot of dividends, because in a typical practice, if you have an hour and a half, you might be able to prep one motion. If you just do prep drills in an hour and a half, you can prep 6 motions, which means you'll get better at prepping, at figuring out the flow of your prep, the time allocation. So just do prep. The 12th exercise is a divided prep exercise. A lot of teams struggle with communication within the round. And one reason why is they communicate during prep and they presume that they've already communicated everything that needs to be communicated. Here's an excellent exercise to break this down. Don't prep together. Then during the round, you absolutely will have to communicate, because you need to relate the entire case and settle on your arguments. Obviously, this is helpful on back half, but it's very helpful on top half, because the prime minister will have to come up with the whole case, and then the deputy prime minister will have to flow the prime minister's case and really communicate to figure out what they're going to do within round. So if you're having communication issues with your partner, I highly recommend that you practice divided prep at least once or twice. 13th is limited preparation. So like I mentioned earlier, you usually don't really get 15 minutes of prep at debate tournaments. But also, you tend to waste time in prep if you're not used to prepping faster. So some teams run out of time. They're like, oh, I can't prep everything in 15 minutes. The truth is, you can prep a lot faster than 15 minutes. You just don't bother doing it. So I recommend doing a limited preparation drill where you gradually decrease the time that you prep from 15 to 12 to 10 to 8 to 6, maybe even to 4 minutes, to see, can I come up with 3 arguments really fast on this debate? Can I figure out what the debate's about in 4 minutes? If you can figure it out in 4, in 6, and 8 minutes, then you'll be doing fine in 12, and you'll be able to come up with splits, with extension material, with all sorts of other goodies, preemptive, rebuttal, all kinds of stuff that you otherwise might not be able to get to if you're prepping slowly. So limited preparation is a good drill. 14th is a solo PM drill. This is something you can do by yourself. You could just take 15 minutes, prep out a motion, practice giving a PM drill, record it, give yourself feedback. 15th is a solo leader of opposition drill. Same thing, except you watch a PM speech online, and then you give the leader of opposition speech in response. The 16th drill is a tag writing drill. So tags for me are the concentrated forms of the arguments, this sort of single sentence statement of what an argument is. A tag writing drill is just, let's practice writing some arguments and refining the tags until they're perfect. Because it's not enough to just write the first tag that comes into mind. You want to get good with quickly iterating on these tags until they're really punchy, especially when you're on the back half. 17th is a rebuttal drill. Now, I think it's helpful to extract rebuttal out from positive matter just to focus on the mechanics of your rebuttal. So one thing that you can do here is someone does tag writing drill and delivers an argument, and someone is just in charge of responding to that argument, giving rebuttal, saying why the argument is wrong. It's helpful here to aim for the goal of having comprehensive rebuttal or refutation. So not just having a single one-sentence response to an argument that took a minute and a half to explain, but at least giving it 30 seconds, 45 seconds of response, because that's what you can do to really put down an argument so it doesn't come back in the subsequent speakers. The 18th drill is a preview drill. This is just to prep out and then deliver the first sort of minute of your speech. A lot of debaters, I think, struggle with the structure of their speech because they don't deliberately practice. How am I structuring the first minute of my speech? What is my hook? What is my preview? Am I sort of clearly outlining the debate just in that first minute? I think that if you just practice previewing your speeches, your first minute to minute and a half of the speech, that can be helpful there. The 19th drill is a modeling drill. This is just take a bunch of motions, especially this house would motions, but also this house believes that, this house prefers motions, and just figure out, how do you model it? What is the debate actually about? And sort of extract this from arguments and just think through, how would this actually work if we were thinking through this? If you practice this a bunch, you'll realize that there are certain structures to models that tend to be effective. You can also watch good people model debates to figure out how to do this. The last drill is a point of information writing drill. This is the easiest and maybe the most helpful of all of these drills. Sometimes in debate rounds, debaters don't have points of information ready to ask. I think this is completely unacceptable, because a lot of times you can write a point of information without ever entering the debate round. Just based on the motion itself, you should be able to generate 4 or 5 points of information that are high quality, that are high impact. And a point of information writing drill allows you to drill down and develop this aptitude for having points of information ready to go and then being ready to ask them. If a another team asks opening opposition, you got anything? There should never be a situation where you don't have anything. So use point of information writing drills until you're always ready to ask questions. All right, that was a lot of drills. So easy win number 2 for you is just to think about your next practice and what drills from the previous slide you're going to use, and you can rewind this to see them again and figure out which ones you want to use. Now, my primary strategy in training is to overcome deficits first and then seek excellence. So figure out what you're bad at and close those gaps rather than trying to be excellent at anything. So this is a basketball player named Andre Drummond who was a terrible free throw shooter. And in one season, he improved his performance from shooting 38% to 60%, which is a huge gain and means that he's scoring at least a point more per game based on how many times he's getting fouled. That's the kind of thing you want to do in your training. So figure out, of those 20 drills, what am I the weakest at? And have a couple practices where you just focus on getting better at those specific deficits. So easy win number 3. This is just an example, but if you are the kind of person who sometimes doesn't have a point of information ready, just do the POI drill until you're ready to do it every time. Now, we're going to talk about providing feedback without judgment. I think that judges are great, but there are a few issues with them. The first is that they have limited attention. So a judge actually, I believe, cannot track what's happening in a round and what's happening in individual speeches in terms of giving detailed feedback to both. I certainly struggle with doing both of these things, and I think a lot of judges struggle at doing both, which is why very often in competition rounds, a judge will be able to give you highly detailed feedback explaining the splits within the round and the ranking. And then when you ask for individual feedback, they sort of struggle to articulate individual feedback beyond just sort of reiterating what was covered in the split and the ranking of the round. So you have to recognize that judges will not be able to track everything in the round. It's better if you ask them to target their attention on certain areas and give feedback. The second thing is that judges are not necessarily trained to provide positive feedback. Because judges are drawn from the ranks of debaters, and debaters, their number one skill is criticizing other debaters, judges very often engage in a lot of negative feedback and not a lot of positive feedback. So it's sometimes helpful to just tell your judge or person watching the round, you're not going to judge the round. Just give feedback, what went well, what could be improved, maybe even just what went well. The third thing is training without judgment will increase your self-reflection. One thing that you should develop the skill of is being able to evaluate your performance in a round without the judge needing to rank the round. So you should be able ultimately to come up with likely rankings of your team's performance or your individual performance within a round without needing to rely on a judge, because judges are imperfect. You may not always get the best judge. If you're only relying on judges to validate your performance, you're going to be sort of, it's going to be hit or miss. And you want ultimately to have something more stable reflecting your performance, whether that's a coach or whether that's you coaching yourself. Now, I recommend recording and studying tape to improve your ability to diagnose what you're doing well and what you're doing poorly. So when I was competing for the University of Hawaii between 2015 and 2017, I started recording a lot of our practice rounds, and I would just rewatch at 1.5 or 2x speed through my speeches to make sure that I wasn't making any egregious mistakes. This exercise was extraordinarily helpful in helping me develop fluency of speech and helping me avoid disfluencies and verbal fillers like uhs or ums, because I was able to see where I was doing these things and then correct for it. It also allowed me to hone the sort of, mannerisms, the hand waving, the kinds of things that debaters get caught in, so that I wasn't waving my arms like wacky waving inflatable tube man. I think that recording your rounds can be extraordinarily helpful for you. I also recommend watching recorded rounds of other debaters. You should have exemplars that you believe are excellent. When I was debating, I really loved watching Sheng-Wu Li rounds, Will Jones rounds, and Bo Seo rounds, and I modeled a lot of my performance on their performance in terms of my speaking style. I don't know whether I succeeded, but I think that it was helpful for me to have something to strive toward. If you were an athlete, you would have the same thing, right? A lot of athletes have somebody that they model their game on. The last thing to cover is rest and recovery. I think that debaters probably train too hard a lot of the times and burn themselves out. I think it's helpful to think about rest and recovery as important in debate as it is in sports. If you just train 24/7
all year long. You're going to get injured. You're going to burn out. It's not as obvious when we're injured in our minds, but I think the injuries are just as profound and they impact our performance. Now, this is the Hawaii Pacific University debate team on a hike that we did recently. One thing that we've been trying to do during the coronavirus lockdown, because we're sort of isolated and we can't go practice at the school, so we have to do everything on Zoom and all the tournaments are on Zoom, is we've been trying to go out for adequately socially distanced hikes in order to have some team bonding, some exercise, and getting some sun. I think that social activities are the cornerstone of rest and recovery, especially if you are trying to build your debate program and you're trying to expand your team. The reason why is socials are vital for physical health. Just social interaction is good for human beings. And if you're able to integrate hiking or other healthy socials, that can be good as well. When I talk about socials, I think it's worthwhile to find socials that don't lead to sort of destructive behaviors, right? So are there ways that you can structure socials on your team that don't involve just getting shit-faced on a Friday night? Are there ways that you can find socials that improve your team's performance rather than degrade it? I also think socials are good for interpersonal health, like you and your partner, if you have a partner, just spending time together outside of debate can help you build your relationship with your partner and therefore improve your performance because you're better aware of what's going on in their life. You know when you can push them to go harder. You know when they need a little bit of time off the gas. If you're a coach, socials are a good way to diagnose this as well. You need to know the sort of temperature of your team. Are they running a fever? Are they cold? How much can you push them? And one of the best ways to assess this is by surveilling them outside of practice. The last thing is team morale. So I think that team building, team unity comes from social activities. I think doing hard things together builds character, builds trust, builds teams. So you should try to do things. I don't know, hiking is a good example, but some people do escape rooms or other sorts of activities, ropes courses, whatever it is, camping, whatever it is, doing something with your team outside of practice can be helpful in terms of restoring yourself. But beyond socials, just making sure that you're not burning yourself out as an individual so that you're able to sustain your performance over a long time. The best route to success is compound interest over time. So if you can make gradual improvements for a long period of time without taking a break, you're going to do a lot better in debate than if you just sprint for a year and then burn out and quit. And that's my recommendation. So in summary, if you think of debate as a sport, and I think it's helpful to do so. Debate is more than just a sport, but it's helpful to think of it because you realize that nutrition and conditioning are key, that basketball teams don't always play full court, so we need to use different drills for different skills. You will learn the importance of providing feedback without judgment and recording and studying the tape so you can assess your performance and your improvement over time. The last thing you want to do is think about rest and recovery, especially socials, to prevent injury and burnout among your team. Thank you. And now I'll open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm going to start with a question that was offered in the question form while you type out your questions. This question was, how can you train without a coach? Now, the third workshop that I'm coming out with after this one is about how to sort of prepare before, during, and after competitions. That in combination with this workshop should give you a general framework for how you should train and how you should approach competition. The primary value of a coach is first that a coach provides structure for your training. A coach provides actionable feedback. And then a coach provides sort of in the moment instructions and guidance during competition. Now, if you do not have a coach, you may not be able to get one. Maybe your school can't afford one. Maybe you live in an isolated area and you're not able to have a coach. The question is, can you as a debater, as the president of your debate society, fulfill the roles of a coach? Can you create systems that fulfill the roles of a coach? So in structuring practices, just don't have every practice be a full round with judgment, right? That's one way. Think to yourself, what are the weaknesses that our team is encountering or that I'm encountering over and over when we're at competition? Is it that we don't have points of information ready? Let's be the team, all 10 of us, where we're always ready with points of information. And this week, we're just going to focus on getting our points of information down. when you're thinking about getting feedback, if you start to record yourself, if you start to train people to give positive feedback, not just a coach, but other people on the team, because everybody is capable of becoming a coach or playing the role of a coach as long as they're provided with the instructions of what they should be doing. So if you train people to provide positive feedback, right, to say, here's what you did well, here's what needs some work, rather than just ranking the teams in the round, you can train coaches on your team to give feedback. You can also give auto feedback by recording yourself and watching your performance back. You and your partner can start to critique each other, right? If you have a partner that you work with fairly often, start to critique each other and figure out what you're doing well. And then during competition, I would recommend watching the next workshop in this series. What I'm going to cover in that workshop are a lot of the things that a coach brings together in terms of the immediate preparation for a competition, how to conduct yourself during a competition, and then how to debrief after a competition. I think if you have a procedure for what to do before, during, and after a competition, you can simulate a lot of the value that a coach adds. Now, obviously, that's no substitute, I think, for having a coach, but we're not always in a position where we can have a coach. When I was competing at the University of Hawaii, I had 3 coaches, but they weren't always able to come to practice. They were all working professionals who were just volunteering their time here and there. So my partner Geraldine and I really had to coach ourselves in a lot of ways. We had to figure out what we were weak at, and then we had to ask our coaches, hey, can you just come in on this one day? We need help assessing our ability to generate extensions, right? So we were very focused with the way that we used coaches, which is another thing. You have to respect your coach's time if you have a coach. And so you want to get good at making the most efficient use of your coach's valuable time. So you don't want to approach them asking them, hey, can you help me get better at debate? It should be, I've been watching my performance for the last couple of weeks and I noticed that I'm really struggling with structuring my speech in the member. Can you help me with that? So when you are in the position to interact with coaches, or for instance, with judges at debate tournaments, you want to come with very specific structured questions so that you can get the most from them in those interactions. Hopefully that answered the question. Any other questions? There was one other question in the question form. So if there are no further questions, I'll answer this last question and then we'll close up for the day. The question was, I'm having trouble listening to and understanding arguments in debate. And how can I get better at this? The first thing is I would recommend going back and looking at the list of drills and figuring out which drills will help target the specific problem that you're having. In this particular case, if you're having trouble tracking arguments and making sense of them, I would start with flowing drills. Because if you are in the position of a round where you're feeling the pressure, right? Oh no, I've got to give this speech, and then I'm, frantically writing, you're not going to get better at the writing and the flowing and the tracking of the arguments and the understanding and the listening. So remove the pressure from yourself. Just watch around and practice flowing. Don't even judge the round, right? Just watch around, practice flowing, practice tracking the arguments, practice really listening, and see if you're able to get more out of it. So this is a procedure that you can use with all of the questions you have afterward. Ask yourself a question about your performance, right? How can I get better at this? And then think to yourself, if I were training for a competition and I needed to design a training regimen, a system for getting better at this thing, what would I do? Start by going back to the slide that has the 20 drills, and maybe there will be some inspiration there. But by no means is that an exhaustive list of the drills that are possible. You can come up with your own drills that will help you solve your own problems. So you, watching this video, are fully capable of coaching yourself and of training yourself for competition. You don't need a coach. It's helpful to have a coach. But if you don't have a coach available, you can coach yourself. And hopefully this video will help you to do so. Thanks again for tuning in, for watching this, and for sharing this. It's been very humbling to know that hundreds of people around the world are watching these videos. And I hope that you will tune in a few days for the third workshop in this series about what to do before, during, and after competition in order to succeed. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you later.